go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. My name is Lacey Hensley, and I'm the director of the Institute for Coordinated Community Response. Oh, that's a mouthful. ICCR. Also have joining me today our program manager, Maya Pridgen. We'll be facilitating your webinar today, and a special shout out to our folks from Canada. Thanks for joining us, and love seeing all the representation from throughout the US. So thanks again for being here. A little bit about us and who ICCR is. We are a program of the Conference on Crimes Against Women. We are a training and technical assistance program funded through the Office of Violence Against Women. And then our mission is to work alongside rural communities to improve their collaborative and systemic responses to domestic violence. And of course, a special note that even though we're funded through the Department of Justice, that all the opinions and conclusions that are expressed today are not those necessarily reflect those of the DOJ. On to more. So not only do we do our monthly free webinars, but we also have some great stuff on our website that we encourage you to check out. That's instituteccr.org. For our on-demand learning, we have some great roll call trainings that are completely free. We have one on strangulation, determining predominant aggressor, trauma-informed framework, and working with victims. Stalking, and our most recent one that we launched over the summer was sexual assault investigations. So we encourage you to check those out. And they're current, and some of our subject matter experts that we have featured at our conference every year. Also, we just finished up, if you were able to join us, our first annual CACOS Summit in South Padre Island, Texas. We think we're going to do it again next year, so we'd love for you to join us. That is a 2-day training. It will happen in the fall of 2025. Come to the beach with us, enjoy some fireworks. Julie was there one of our presenters today, and we had a great time and would love to see you there next year. We will be focusing again on rural practitioners and also resort communities. So if you belong to one of those communities, make a note now to join us next fall in South Padre. And then finally, we have a wonderful resource library on our website with all types of articles and facts and things to learn from, specifically regarding rural folks. All right, without further ado, we are going to switch over to our program for today. So I want to introduce to you Julie Germann. Julie has been a friend of the conference for many years. If you've attended the Conference on Crimes Against Women, you may have gotten to hear one of her wonderful presentations. So she's a consultant, former prosecutor, trainer, and then also joining her today is Danni Hernandez. Danni is an adult forensic interview coordinator, the coordinator for adult forensic interviewing with the Forensic Center of Excellence. And I'm going to let them tell you a little bit more about them. So take it away, guys. Thanks for being here.
Great, everyone. Let me know if you're having any trouble with seeing the slides, but welcome to everyone. And we're here to talk to you today. We're going to talk about utilizing an adult forensic interviewing program from our experience in implementing and utilizing a program in Houston, Texas. As she mentioned, my name is Julie Germann. I am a former prosecutor and now a consultant. And with regard to the Forensic Center for Excellence, I helped develop the forensic interviewing protocol that they utilize there. And then I continue in training the forensic interviewers who work there and providing monthly peer review of their interviews. And I'll let Danni introduce herself.
All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Danni Hernandez. I'm the Adult Forensic Interviewer Coordinator here at the Forensic Center in Houston, Texas. I've been with the Forensic Center since 2020. I started as an advocate here, and then I transitioned into the Adult Forensic Interviewing role around 2021. So I've been at the Forensic Center for a while now, and it's great to have everyone here today.
And I'll just say that as we go through, if questions arise, if you want to pop them into the chat, somebody will be monitoring that, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. And we anticipate leaving a little time at the end too, in case there are questions we can answer.
All right. Well, like I said, the Forensic Center, we're also known as Texas Forensic Nurse Examiners. Our name can be a little bit long, but we are a victim service center where we have different, we offer different services. We have our nursing program. They are 24 hours nurses on call. We also have advocacy here as well, and we also have the adult forensic interviewing program for victims of different crimes and victimizations. We do sexual assault, domestic violence, human trafficking, elder abuse. For the nursing piece, we see all ages. And then for the forensic interviewing program, it's adults only 17 and up. So like I said, at our service, we have different we offer different things like the nursing program, we have the forensic interviewing, we have advocacy, and then we actually started our counseling program not too long ago. We cover over 23 counties within Texas. So for our nursing program, we have different facilities. So we have our program here in Houston. We also service in the Rio Grande Valley. And then we also have a program in the North Texas region. We are excited to be launching in San Antonio pretty soon, hopefully within the next month. So that will be our third satellite location. So that would add some different counties to our programs. In 2023, our nursing program saw over 2,300 medical forensic exams. The adult forensic interviewing program, we saw over 600 interviews within that year. And our advocacy team saw over 1,000 hours. So they usually see our victims after an exam or after a forensic interview is done. So for our nursing program, we have different clinic locations that also depends of the satellite location. So in Houston, we have 7 clinic locations, meaning not seen at a hospital. In the Rio Grande Valley, we have 1 Houston clinic, a clinic location, and then in North Texas region, we also have a clinic location. Usually, our nurses, what they do is they will try to meet the victim where they're at or what's closest to them. So with that being said, we partner with a lot of different hospitals. We partner with HCA hospitals and CHS St. Luke's hospitals. So in the Houston area, we partner with over 75 hospitals. In the Rio Grande Valley, we see our nurses go to 15 different hospitals. And in the North Texas region, they go to over 22 hospitals. So our nurses will meet the victim at the hospital or at the clinic space. They will triage them, whatever is best for them. And then our nurses will go and do the exam for them. For our nursing department, we also partner with the children assessment centers. I know in the Houston area, we go to Children's Safe Harbor. I know I saw some people here from Conroe in the chat, so you guys may be familiar with that for the Children Safe Harbor Assessment Center. So our nurses go there as well, and they do nursing exams there. We also go to the Crisis Center in the Matagorda County, and we also go to Brazoria County. I know that one was recently added, as well as the Fort Bend County. This is all in the Houston area as of now.
Great, thanks, Danny. When we talk about why do we do a forensic interview of an adult, we really need to start by talking about trauma. Of course, forensic interviewing of children has been around since the 1980s, is widely accepted as generally the practice in most places to provide a forensic interview of a child in recognition of the trauma that they've been through, in recognition of having those good interviewing skills, and in recognition of not wanting to lead the child into any answer that isn't truthful. But most of that is true with adults. While adults are not as susceptible to being led into answers as maybe children are, adults who have suffered any kind of interpersonal abuse have also been through a significant trauma. And because of that, and because we now understand what trauma does to the brain, that's why we've gotten to this place where we developed this protocol. So what is trauma? The definition of trauma that I like to use is that trauma is an event that combines fear, horror, or terror with an actual or perceived lack of control. A traumatic event, which doesn't always have to be a crime or a violent event, it could be a car accident. Any kind of traumatic event creates psychological trauma when it overwhelms the individual's ability to cope and leaves that individual kind of fearing death, mutilation, or psychosis. The other thing to know about trauma is that it's really subjective. So we can't say these things will cause trauma for an individual. We know things that are likely to cause trauma, but it is subjective. What is traumatic to me may not be traumatic to you. And what really matters in those things are those 3 E's, right? So the event itself, so an event or a circumstance can cause trauma, might be domestic violence or sexual assault. How someone experiences that event will determine whether or not it's traumatic to them. And we know that the effects of trauma can be many, right? Including physical, social, emotional, spiritual consequences that people will deal with long after the trauma has ended. There are a few types of trauma. For those of us who work in the criminal justice arena, we're mostly dealing with acute trauma, that event that has most recently happened that brought this victim or survivor into our care. And that could be, as I mentioned, interpersonal violence. It could be sexual violence, human trafficking. But we also need to recognize as we interview and work with these people that there are other kinds of trauma. And so therefore, like complex trauma is exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events that are usually invasive or interpersonal in nature. So for instance, someone who's living in a war-torn country which is a trauma, may also experience sexual violence, which is another traumatic event. So those are varied traumatic events happening to the same person. Chronic trauma is when we talk about repeated and prolonged. And so we certainly see that in domestic violence and human trafficking. These are people who don't have a single incidence of violence or that acute trauma, but they have ongoing and repeated trauma. How trauma impacts the brain. And for those of you who've had training on the neurobiology of trauma, you know that this alone is an 1 to 2 hour long course to sort of teach you how trauma impacts the brain. So this is really just a shortened version so we can get to what you came for today, is talking about the forensic interviewing. But what we know is that the brain is going to react according to habits and patterns. We talk sometimes about fight, flight, or freeze, where someone might fight back during a trauma. They might try to run away, or more likely, they very often freeze. That when a survivor is in their sort of trauma brain, that the rational part of their brain, that prefrontal cortex, is not doing what it's supposed to do, right? It's not helping you with executive functioning and thinking and planning. And so really our victims have limited access to create their own reaction to that trauma. The brain is deciding how they're going to react. We know that memory storage, what memories are going to be captured, encoded, and stored by the brain during that trauma event is different. We're going to see more storage of emotional memories and sensory memories. We're going to see memories that the brain thinks are central to survival rather than things that are peripheral. And so really what happens to the brain during a trauma impacts both how that individual reacts to that trauma in the moment, but it also is going to impact how they're able to relay the events of that trauma later on when we want to question them about it. When we think about how trauma impacts a memory, very often they are referred to as sensory fragments or snapshot memories. They are these just bits of memory that may not fit so well together in a nice chronological order. So it feels disorganized. It feels like maybe the victim isn't making sense. So when you look at the pictures on the screen right now, what we would like when we interview a witness or a victim to crime is for them to give us a nice story with a beginning and a middle and an end that goes in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But what they're able and capable of giving us is more of that picture on the right. They have all these little snapshots of memories. They may not know which one came before the other one. The memories that they've encoded are true. They're just disorganized. And so it's difficult for them to sometimes answer those standard who, what, when, why questions that have traditionally been part of a law enforcement interview. So we see that this impacts the criminal justice system all over the place, right? So especially if law enforcement is responding in that moment following a trauma, and due to that rush of hormones, due to the brain functioning in the way that it's supposed to when it's in a traumatic event, the victim is not in control of their prefrontal cortex. They are talking about what they can recall, and it's not ordered. It doesn't make sense to the officer. And so they feel like they're not being believed based on the questions that they're being asked and their own difficulties in trying to relay their experiences to us. And when a victim feels not believed, they tend to disengage with the system. And that's impactful in multiple ways, right? One, the victim doesn't get the resources that they need to heal and move on, and get to a better place. But two, the criminal justice system can't operate either, because when we don't have a victim who wants to come in and work with us, we cannot hold offenders accountable for their violent behavior. So out of this idea of trauma impacting adults and understanding that it may be impacting the way our criminal justice system works, the Forensic Center for Excellence was approached by the prosecutor's office in Houston County, the DA's office, with the idea of developing an adult forensic interview for the process of interviewing adults 17 and older. We also specialize in interviewing developmentally delayed adults. And the idea behind it was the prosecutors felt strongly enough that if they could get better interviews, recorded interviews with these victims, they would have better success at trial. So we're going to take you through what is generally our protocol for an adult forensic interview at the Forensic Center for Excellence. This was developed over time. We've amended it as we found new situations that arose that we had to find a better way to deal with, or as we found something that didn't work or did work. At the very heart of this is just generally trying to get as much information as we can from a victim patiently, without asking them questions in a leading way. I mean, that's really all that's at the heart of this. The disclaimer that we want you to know is that while we do teach this protocol and we'd be happy to have you reach out, we want you to know that sitting through a 90-minute webinar does not qualify you to use this protocol. You may learn tips and tricks that you can use in the work you're doing, but when we do train interviewers in this protocol, it's a 40-hour week-long training. And so if you have interest, we'd encourage you to reach out and learn from us about how to administer the protocol. So
a lot of our victims aren't clothed completely. They are have just been sexually assaulted, and these patrol officers are coming on the scene where this traumatic event happened, trying to a lot of times interview our victims not too far from where that defendant or trafficker is, and conduct an interview in that stressful environment. Those victims are going to shut down. If you're getting any information out of them, how truthful are they really going to be when their defendant or trafficker is sitting just a few yards away from them?
When a crime occurs, on scene is not the time to try to interview someone. I think the first initial interview is very appropriate, especially if they are looking for a perpetrator. But as far as the details, those should wait, and it's best practice to wait during that initial impact phase. Our victim survivors are at a heightened state, therefore their recall is not always at its best. And officers at that time sometimes do want answers when really first and foremost the priority should be the physical and mental well-being of that victim survivor, ensuring that basic needs are met.
Since the interview program was started in June of 2020, we've conducted over 1,700 interviews. The questions that we ask during the interview are usually open-ended questions. They are also based on the victimization, sexual assault, domestic violence, human trafficking, adults molested as children. So our questions are going to be based on the victimization.
Sexual assault, that is traumatic in and of itself. It's a very intimate type of conversation that a lot of people don't like to have. So with dealing with Texas F&E, they communicate without issue, right? And they're willing to hold hands and walk with our victims.
During the initial incident, exactly, you're at the heightened state. You've just gotten out of fight, flight, or freeze at that moment. So therefore, your memory recall is scattered. When you give your brain some time to heal from what's happened, then they're able to organize a little bit better. And that's why when we do have victim survivors that are interviewed right after something has occurred, and then you interview them a couple days or even a week later, sometimes the stories don't line up, and it's not that they weren't telling the truth, it's that the recall is completely different during that time. So having a group of nurturing interviewers that are trauma-informed and victim-centered, I think is what adds value to the investigative process.
It's also important for the interview to be done in a way that is legally defensible and that they are getting to all the elements of the offenses. Because really the idea behind a forensic interview is that it is a full and complete interview, and we don't have to keep asking people these questions over and over again.
So many distraught victims and individuals who had been traumatized first by the assault or the injury that they received from the criminal, and then some felt that the system itself traumatized them again. Our understanding of how to better work with crime victims as witnesses and human beings is improving. And we've learned that by focusing on the trauma of the victim as part of the way we investigate the case, that we can help them and help their case at the same time.
The forensic interview is a soft room. They already have an interviewer that really empathizes with what they're saying. It's a nice start to introduce myself to my victims so that they feel comfortable with me.
Our interviews are done in collaboration of law enforcement. All of the interviews are scheduled online. We just ask that they provide a little bit of information about the victim, who's going to be observing the interview or who the leading investigator is. And then after the interview schedule, the day of the interview, law enforcement can observe through our live link, or they can also observe here at our office. We have an observation area for law enforcement where they can observe through the cameras.
Nothing that happens at TXF&E happens by accident. They're very thoughtful about seeing crime victims as a whole. The change that they are making is very positive, not only in the lives of crime victims, but in our ability to successfully prosecute these cases and get convictions.
Alrighty, so how did we get here? Like Julie mentioned earlier, in 2020, the Harris County DA's office approached our CEO about having the same opportunity that children have to be able to do forensic interviews for adults. This was something that has never been done. Also, whenever they approach, in 2020, we were going through a pandemic, so training and finding all of this was very hard. So once we were approached, we started doing some research. There wasn't a lot of information out there for adult forensic interviewers because this is something that has never been done. We, after a lot of research, we did some trainings online. We launched our program in June of 2020. Whenever we launched our program, we only had 2 interviewers. Again, this was something new that had never been done before. So we created our own protocol. Like Julie mentioned, this is something that she helped with. And it's a flexible structure. So it's something that as time has passed, we've changed for the better. Now we have 4 interviewers in place, and hopefully, with plans of expansion and maybe adding more interviewers with time as we get more busy and as the word gets out there for adult forensic interviews. Since we launched in June of 2020, we've done over 2,600 interviews. So, that's a lot since June of 2020. And we've also conducted over 500 TFIs, which stands for teleforensic interviews. So this is usually for victims, or we call our victims participants to be neutral. So this is for whoever has relocated from the Houston area, or they're not in Texas, or maybe not in Houston anymore. So we still want for them to have the option to be able to participate in a forensic interview. So what we usually do is we try to find a facility, whatever they're located. We partner with maybe like some children assessment centers or different facilities in the area where that victim is living. And we have them go, that way we can ensure confidentiality and make sure that they are in a neutral space, and for the safety as well. So we've done those those interviews, like we've done more than 500 since we first started our program. Some interesting facts is we've worked with over 50 agencies, including the FBI, Homeland Security, TABC, and DPS. So, since we started, we've definitely added a lot of agencies, and, we spread the word around for the adult forensic interviewing program. We've also conducted interviews in 13 different languages. We always want to be trauma informed, and we want to make sure that the victims have choice and to be able to do the interview in their own language. So we do interpretation live during the interview. So we will schedule all of that interpretation ahead of time just to make sure that victims have that opportunity to do it in their own language so they feel more comfortable. And the farthest location we've ever done a virtual interview has been in Australia. So we wanted to add that out there. I think we added Italy this year. So it's definitely nice to be able to, have that opportunity for them to do those interviews where they're at and still be able to, get the process started and everything. I think the next one, okay. So like I mentioned earlier, we see a lot of different victimizations, but the main ones that we see is sexual assault. We've started to see a lot of adults molested as children. We do domestic violence, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, elder abuse, and we also do witnesses to crimes interviews. So there is a lot of work that goes behind, somebody before somebody comes in for an interview. One of the first things is that we do collaborate with law enforcement a lot. All of our interviews are from law enforcement referrals. So they can either go online, schedule the interviews. They can also call our hotline number since it may be something new. They don't know how it works. We kind of explain the process, but law enforcement is the one that makes the referral for a forensic interview. We do ask them information about the participants, like their age. We do want to make sure that they are 17 and older. We do work with different counties, and for every county, it varies in age. Again, we want to work with those children assessment centers as well. So, but for sure, it's always 17 and older. For some counties, maybe 19 and older, and 18. I think there may be some questions. Is there any questions so far?
No, Danny, I don't think
No,
so.
okay. Just wanted to make sure. So yeah, so we make sure that we get a little bit of information such as like language. Like I said, we do our interviews in the participants' language. So if they do speak other language, we want to make sure that we know that ahead of time just so we can schedule that interpretation. We also address any cognitive delays or any mental health concerns, just so we can be prepared before our interview. The day of the interview, we do, once the participant gets here, we make sure law enforcement is either here on site observing, or they can also have the option of observing through our live link. So we will get with law enforcement to arrange all of that. We get a brief case background on the case, just so we can base our interview on that victimization. We just double check if there's any charges or anything that are gonna happen, or we just want to make sure that our participants feel safe being in there. And we also, as an interviewer, we just utilize some tools in there, such as our backup recorders and our iPads where we take notes. All of our interviews, we in the rooms, which we will see in a little bit, we do have our cameras in there, and they usually work just fine, but you never know with technology. So we always use our backup recorders just in case, we want to make sure that their participant words are safe. And one of the purpose of the interviews is to make sure that they don't have to repeat themselves as many times. So we always want to let them know that, and those are some of the tools that we would use. So whenever we created the protocol, we created this like 6-step for a forensic interview. I'll read them really brief, but we're gonna talk about each of them more in depth. But the first one is establishing connection and consent. The second one is the setting expectations. There is the subject introduction. Number 4 is personal account. Number 5 is the neutral fact finding, and number 6 is summation. This is something that we created within our protocol. So the establishing connection and consent, one of our biggest thing is we want to build that rapport as soon as a participant comes into our office. We always want to empower them and give them their choices. As soon as they walk in, each interviewer knows what interview they're assigned to. So we go and we greet our participants, let them know who's going to be the interviewer. We kind of show them around a little bit, let them know if they want any snacks, any water, anything that they need, any bathroom. Again, showing them everything where they're at, just so they can feel a little bit more comfortable. This is a new space for them, so they don't know a lot of times what they're walking into. So we want to make them as comfortable as possible. Once we go in the interviewing space, we make them familiar with everything. We let them know that there is a camera, that everything's being recorded. We do let them know who is observing through that camera, which is law enforcement. A lot of times they are familiar with who's observing, because that it will be their investigator on their case, which usually they would talk before coming in. We also address all the basic needs, and we also want to acknowledge their trauma. Again, a lot of times they come in and they don't know what they're walking into, so they may be a little bit nervous. They may start crying right away. Everyone reacts in different ways. So we want to, acknowledge the trauma, but we also have to remain neutral in there. I know for me at the beginning it was a little bit hard because I came from an advocacy world. So that change was a little bit hard for me at the beginning, but we do have to stay neutral in there. But we can also be empathetic, and we can, some of the things we say, is, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Thank you for being here and for having the courage to come in and talk to us today. But again, we always want to address their basic needs, make sure they're okay before we get started with the interview, because participants are not able to think if they don't have their basic needs addressed. So we always want to make sure that they are comfortable in there and they know what's going on.
So here are 2 examples of the adult forensic interview rooms that we utilize. You can see that we try to keep soft colors, really neutral pictures in there. The photograph that you're seeing is taken from the angle that the camera captures while it's recording. And you can also see, I'll point out that we have an easel on wheels. It's one of the things that we added as we started to do this work. Free drawing is really common in child forensic interviews. But what we found is very often we had victims who were trying very hard to explain the location of something or how a room was laid out. Or and they'd be drawing it in the air with their hands, right? And this was over here and that was over there. And we found that by getting the easel, they're able to draw that out. The camera can see the drawing as they are doing it. So that was really great addition to helping our participants be able to really feel like they could fully tell their experiences. Remember that when they do create something in that room, it is evidence. And so we always have participants sign any drawing that they make and date it. And then that's turned over to law enforcement because it is part of the file. But really you just need this soft space. We use lamps to keep the lighting, more softer. We offer blankets, we offer fidget toys, those kinds of things just to make the room feel soft and safe. So after you have brought them into the room, right, and you've created that space that is physically and emotionally safe, and we've familiarized them with the environment, we also want to manage expectations about what's going to happen in there. For most of the participants, forensic, even the word forensic doesn't mean a lot, or if it does, it means something scary like CSI kind of thing, maybe dealing with blood or medical stuff. So we need to make sure that we're managing their expectations about what a forensic interview really is, and that we discuss the audio and video recording. We'll show you some videos throughout this presentation, but all of our interviewers will identify and point out the camera to the participant as they're entering the room, so they know that they're being recorded. We discuss why we have an audio backup, and really work with using just layman's terms, right? Instead of all the criminal justice terminology, again, to put people at ease and to also make sure that they fully understand what is happening. Interviews should always be conducted in the victim's preferred or first language. And we do prefer in person if possible. Danny told you how we developed the AFI in part because of the pandemic. But in part because of sometimes distance doesn't allow an in-person interview, but it would be the first choice. When we're establishing connection and consent, we want to remember that in a trauma for these victims, a lot of power has been taken away from them. And so we do try to keep them fully informed and make sure that they understand and are aware of what they are committing to in doing this interview. So we have a consent form that they fill out on camera. It's one of the very first things we do after they're settled into the room. So it's video and audio recorded. Every line of the consent is read aloud to the participant. And they're given the opportunity to ask questions about it. It explains that the interviewer is not law enforcement, though law enforcement is watching the interview from another room. We answer any questions they might have. We allow them to have a copy of the consent that they signed at the end. There's only one question on that consent that we make optional. If the individual is unwilling to consent to the forensic interview or the recording of it, then no interview occurs. But the final bit, the last question we ask them is about the ability to use their recording for training purposes, where we, as you'll see in a minute, we pixelate out the participants so that we don't share with you their name or their identity. You'll just be able to hear their voices. Now they can opt out of that, and if they don't want their video used for training, we won't, of course, use it for training, but it doesn't prevent them from getting a forensic interview.
Button and it turns blue, it means that we're not recording, right? We have blankets if you want to grab one and use one during the interview, or you can also take it home. And we also have like little stress balls and tissues whenever you need them, okay? So this is, I want to explain this as well. This is a handheld recorder. It's audio only, there's no camera to it, and it's just in case technology fails. So everything in the room is working perfectly fine. You just never know with technology. So we use this to keep your words safe and hopefully reduce the amount of times you have to talk about what happened. So I'm going to press record. I'm going to put it right here. So a little bit more about what a forensic interview is. So a forensic interview is a safe, neutral, and non-judgmental space for you to come in and explain what happened in your own words. I'm not part of law enforcement. I'm not part of district attorney's office. I'm simply your interviewer for today. And the reason that it's forensic is because it's an investigative conversation, it's not an interrogation. And it's part of the case. Button and it turns blue, it means that we're not recording.
So as you saw in that video, we first explained what the interview is, just so they know, everything that's happening as soon as they walk in the room. After that, we, like Julie mentioned, we go over the consent. And then once they've agreed everything's good with the consent, we go into the setting expectation phase. Before we do this, we just get a little background information from the participant. And then after that, we just explain a few things for them to keep in mind during the interview. One of the things that we first mentioned is phones. This is something that nowadays it's in our lives. We're all very attached to our phones, but it can be a little distracting in there, and we really want to try to reduce those distractions. So we always let them know if they can put their phone on silent, if they have an emergency, and if it's something that, that they're waiting on a call or something, just to let us know. But we do mention that. We also mentioned confidentiality, that anything that they're there for, we won't be sharing with anybody outside of the investigative team, especially if you have victims that come with like their family members, or some of the younger victims that come with like maybe their parents or something. We do let them know that nothing that we talk in there will be shared with anybody else, just again to put them at ease. There may be some things that we're going to talk in there that they don't want other people to know, so we just always want to make sure that they're comfortable. Like I mentioned, we also take notes in there. We here at the Forensic Center, we use iPads. At the very beginning, when we first started, we used to use paper. But then, like Julie mentioned, everything that it's in there can be discoverable. And so it was a lot of paper. So we moved to iPads. It's easier to store. We do let them know that they can see our notes. All their notes are nothing clinical or judgmental. We are just writing down things that they are mentioning in there, and that later on we want to go and clarify. And the reason we take notes is, they might be sharing a lot of information, and we want to make sure that we gather all their details. And in case we need to go ask them, we can just go back and look at our notes. If we ask them anything, we do let them know to not guess, and just to let us know if they don't remember anything, it's totally okay. We just want them to say that and not guess. We also have them mention every detail. We let them know that every detail is important, and it's important during the interview, and just to not leave anything out. And then what we do towards the end of the interview is we take that like law enforcement break, where the interviewer will step out of the room and touch base with whoever's observing the interview, just to make sure we've gathered all the details needed for the investigation. So we do let them know that. But we also let them know that if they need a break before us mentioning it, they can always let us know. And again, we always want to make sure that we are acknowledging their trauma and making sure that they are okay in there. So I think the next video is going to be one of our interviews, just mentioning the setting expectations.
Thank you for sharing that. So just a few more things for us to keep in mind while we're talking. First, I want you to know that it's completely fine for you to have your phone out and check it whenever you need to. I do just ask that you put it on silent. And that's just to minimize distractions while we're talking. Thank you for doing that. I have my phone out. It's also on silent. You may see me look down and check it from time to time, just to make sure that the detectives observing haven't lost connection. Okay. So I know I'm doing a lot of the talking. In a moment, it'll be your opportunity to share what brought you in today, and my job during that time will be to listen. So you'll see me taking notes on my iPad, and you're welcome to see my notes anytime. I just want to make sure I'm gathering any information that you taught me correctly. Okay? And then after you share, I'll ask you some questions. I ask questions because I don't know a lot of information about what brought you in today for the interview, and I don't want to assume anything. So some of the questions I ask may seem weird or obvious, but again, I don't want to get anything wrong. And when you're sharing, there's no detail that's too small. I just ask that if you don't know or don't remember something, that you don't guess. Okay? And then towards the end of the interview, we'll take a break. I'll step out of the room and go check in with the detective observing to see if they have any other questions. We can take a break anytime you want to. You can just let me know. Okay? Do you have any questions about anything? So we're at the point of the interview where if you feel ready to go ahead and share what brought you in today, we can get started. If you'd rather take a moment, you and I can get to know each other first before we talk. It's completely up to you.
So what brought me in at gmail.com.
Thank you for sharing So just
All right, so after we mention all the setting expectations, we go into the subject introduction phase, which, as you kind of saw in the last minute of the last minute of that video, our interviewer just kind of did like a transitional phase where we offer them, sometimes they may be a little bit nervous, so we do offer them the choice to either we can get to know each other a little bit, or if they're, and then after they share, we can start the interview. Or if they don't want to share, they can start sharing about what they're in there today. A lot of times participants prefer to get to know each other just because they may be a little bit nervous, and it may be easier for them to start that way. And whenever we do that, all of our interviewers, we just like pick like very like broad things that we want them to know. Obviously, we're not gonna go super personal in details, but we just kind of like brought information that we want them to know. And that way we'll get a little more background on how they're going to be sharing information with us in there, if they're maybe more quiet or if they're more talkative or things like that. And then once we do that, then we'll start the interview. This is another clip of us giving them the option of getting to know each other, or if they want to start by sharing. And I believe he wanted to get to know each other a little bit.
So we can start this interview in a couple different ways. We can start by getting to know each other a little bit, and then talk about what's bringing us here. If you want to skip the get to know each other,
it don't matter. If you want to get to know me, I'm willing to tell you. If you want to like, hey, let's get straight to the.
I want to do what you want to do.
I'm comfortable either way.
You're in control here. You let me. I want you to have the choice to let me know what you want to do.
I guess we can get to know each other.
Okay. Do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
You can go first.
Me? Okay. So my name is Daniela, but I go by Danni. Kind of like you. Your name is Joshua, but you go by Jay. I'm 28 years old. What else? As you can hear, I'm sure you can hear my accent. I'm not from here. I'm from Colombia, but I've been here for a long time now. Okay. I've always lived in Houston. So I love Houston. What else? I have a small family here. I have one sister only, so we're very close. On my free time, I like to spend time with like my family, my friends, just to spend time with them. But I also like to just stay at home and do nothing. Yeah, exactly. So just like be home and relax. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Tell me about you.
I'm Jay as well. But my name is Joshua. I'm from Louisiana.
Okay.
I have a big family. It's 5 of us.
Oh wow.
But I'm more closer to my baby sister than my other siblings. I like to stay at home. I just had a birthday in March, and
happy belated birthday.
Thank you. I like to stay at home. I'm a homebody.
Yeah.
I guess. Because the older we get, we just like, there's nothing out there. I done seen everything, I done did everything. I just don't stay at home.
You just now enjoy being home, right?
Yeah, everybody know I'm like that. Mom, like, get out the house, go do something. I'm like, no. Yeah. Everybody come to my house, but I don't want to go.
I know. And leaving the house is expensive. You leave your house and you spend so much money. Well, thank you for sharing a little bit about you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, how are you feeling right now?
I'm okay. I was a little bit nervous coming here. I was like, I gotta talk about the situation, and I just feel like if you made a statement about something that happened at a big hospital, we're not talking about a small hospital, they was like,
All right. So as you can see in that video, he felt a little more comfortable. He was comfortable, but he was a natural. He wanted to share about himself. And I think he was also like a smooth transition into that personal account, where this is where they share why they're here for the interview. So he started talking, and it was easier for him to talk about, the reason why he was there. During that time, our role as interviewers is to listen and to take notes, but continue doing the active listening. And just know that some people's personal account may be short, some may be long. A lot of times they may not know how to start, or they might just tell you very short, like, I was here because I was sexually assaulted. So we just kind of have to work with them into getting a little bit more information. But during this time, we take notes, we try to formulate like questions, things that we want to go back and clarify. But we also make sure that they know that we are listening. So and we try not to interrupt them, so we can do a lot of our like body, like body listening. We can let them know, like, we can nod or we can say yes, just to know though that we are there and we're not just thinking about what we're gonna have for dinner. So it's very important for them to know that we are there with them present.
I think, Danny, that's a great point. I think we talk a lot as a team about there being power in the pause. It's really hard. We all have a tendency to want to fill space. And so very often, as our participants need to think about these really hard things to remember, there's long pauses. And I think it takes a while, but you have to learn not to talk over those people and to just be okay in the silence as that person gets their personal account out. And I think, Danny's really great with the long pauses. She doesn't mind sitting in silence.
It can be uncomfortable at first, but like Julie said, it's something that you learn. I think, yeah, it's for sure. We always want to like keep asking questions. And I think that's where, they're trying to figure out what they want to say, or they're really trying to remember. So it's important to give them that time during that personal account.
Once they have completed their personal account, and as we said, we usually pause for a minute to make sure that they really have completed their personal account. Then we move into the neutral fact-finding aspect of the offense. We find that very often victims of violence may, especially sexual violence, tend to sort of gloss over the really important details that police officers and prosecutors want. And they'll say something like, and then he did that to me, or something that really doesn't give you the details you would need to know about that case. And so that's why we go back to neutral fact finding after. We don't interrupt them in the moment, but after they've completely completed their narrative, we'll go back. We may start out with some really easy questions, just to ground the participant, give them some more confidence in answering questions so they don't fear the questions and they don't think that they're going to be grilled or cross-examined. And it might be, if they have been referring to someone doing something to them, assaulting them in some way, we may just start with, do you know this person's, what's this person's name? Can you tell us what they look like? And getting those descriptions, something that's really easy and not those difficult questions. We move to broad questions. Again, if someone doesn't know where to start, they may say, well, I don't really know where to begin. I don't know what you want me to say. And so you might start with really something like, just tell me what you can remember about your experience. Start wherever feels natural for you. We always work to avoid leading questions, and that's part of even our peer review process of reviewing interviews after the fact to make sure that we're avoiding leading questions. Leading question is going to be any question that puts the answer in the question. So if you are asking questions that require a lot of yes, no answers, you're probably asking leading questions. Instead of saying, were you feeling scared when that happened? We would want the interviewer to ask, how were you feeling when that happened? Tell me what you were feeling during this time. We encourage participants to give us narrative responses by not rushing them, not interrupting them, not peppering them with questions while they're doing that. When we do have to move to asking questions about different events, I always like to describe it as the funnel effect. You start with the broadest question you can and only get narrow as you have to, as they maybe don't give you the detail that you were looking for. So you would start with something really open-ended, like, tell me how you were feeling when that happened. A focused recall question would be when you use the participant's own words, and that's why our interviewers take notes. use their own words and restate them to form your question. So you told me that you were pushed into a car when this happened. Tell me everything you can remember about that car. And so that's a very broad question. Tell me everything you can remember about that car versus tell me the color of that car. Tell me the make of that car. Tell me the model of that car. You might have to get focused like that, but by just asking them everything they can remember, you might get all that information anyway. Multiple option is something that happens frequently in children interviews. It happens with our participants who are cognitively delayed with some regularity, where maybe they're not understanding your question or they're not able to answer a more focused question. And so you want to give them options. In that case, you would say, did this happen in house, an apartment, or something else, right? So you give them that out. You don't force them into two choices. You always give them an out. And then finally, closed-ended questions are very specific questions used to clarify details. But again, they're not leading questions. So a closed-ended question would be, what color was the car? A leading question would be, was the car red? So even when we get down to trying to clarify very specific details in an interview, we're still avoiding any kind of leading question. And then finally, after we, after we do the neutral fact finding, that's the point where we're going to take that break and check in with the investigative team. And this is so important because as a prosecutor, what we know is when we take multiple statements from our victims, they're never going to look identical, right? We're always giving the defense something to cross-examine them on. So for the purpose of not inflicting additional trauma on our participants, of having them question multiple times, but also for the purpose of building stronger cases, we want this to be the one and only interview of this victim in this case. So we take this break to check in with the investigative team, which would be law enforcement or perhaps even a prosecutor who's watching, to see if they have any remaining questions that were left unanswered by the interview as it was conducted. During that time, the recording remains on. We advise the participants that the recording remains on just in case they would be inclined to make a phone call or something. We want them to know that they're on camera and being recorded. But they're also free to leave the room at that time if they want to go to the restroom, get another snack, just get up and stretch their legs. We leave the door open or closed depending on their choice, and they can come and go as they like. When the interviewer returns from the check-in with the investigative team, at that point, they may have some additional questions, which they will ask, or they will just move into kind of the summation, right, of ending the interview. If they don't have additional questions. So one of the things that we advise participants, we know sometimes when you talk about a traumatic experience, that will at some point trigger additional memories for you. And so we tell them that if this happens, they could have a second interview. They would get the same interviewer, and that they wouldn't rehash over everything that was told to the interviewer, but they would pick up from the point where they have new memories or memories that they didn't share the last time they were in there. So they're provided the card of the interviewer with their name and contact information and told how they would do that process should they need a second interview. We offer resources at this point to kind of explain what the Forensic Center offers in case they need a nurse's exam and haven't had one yet, or if they'd like to meet with our advocates or our mental health providers, or if they're in need of community resources like housing or mental health care outside of our agency, we have the resources to connect them to all of the things that they might need following their victimization. And then we want to close the interview. And so part of that is, thanking them for being brave and coming in and sharing, making sure that they have their investigators' contact information as well as their interviewers. And then also trying to bring them back to a neutral topic. So we know that it's very distressing to talk about these traumatic events. And so we don't want to send them out into the world in this state of trauma. So we do try to switch back to a neutral topic, ask them what they're planning to do with the rest of the day, or if they have the ability to engage in some self-care following this interview. So we have a video that will kind of show this summation portion of the interview.
Remember any additional memories about, what happened with your dad, you can always come back and we can talk a second time, okay? Okay. Besides what we did today, we do have other programs, like we have, like I told you, the nursing. If you ever want to get your body checked, they're here. We also have our advocates here. If you need any community resources, they can help find any therapy, counseling, anything like that. Any help that you need, they can help you with that. Is there something that you would want? They're here today if you want to talk to them about any of those resources.
Am I paying for their services?
No, so to go talk to them right now, no, it's free, and they try to find free resources. So they would want to talk to you, try to see what they can help you with whatever it is that you need, and they try to get those free resources for you. I know we do have counseling here. It's also free resources. I just don't know what the process is to enter into the counseling program, but that's something our advocates can help with. So if you want to talk to them right now, it's free. It would just be like a small kind of talk with them just to check in.
Yeah.
Is that okay? So I'll take you to another room. There's no cameras or anything in that other room. I'm just gonna make sure that is available, and then I'll have the advocate come and talk to you. Okay? And again, just think about the charges with your siblings, with your brothers, and if that's something you would want to move forward with, just make sure you let the investigator know. Okay? I will give you my card, and I'll give you both of our advocates' card. I'm not sure who's going to go talk to you right now, but this one's my card. Again, if you remember any additional details or anything, you can always, contact me. And then these are our advocates. I believe Vanessa might be the one talking to you today, but I'll double check. And so this is our card just in case, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure meeting you today.
It was a pleasure meeting you too.
Absolutely. How are you spending the rest of your day?
I'm gonna go to my nails after.
Good. Do something good for yourself today, because I know it was a lot.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
Go to my nails and then probably go pick up my daughter.
Where is daughter right now?
She's with my sister.
With
my
his-
older sister.
With Jenny?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know what you're gonna do on your nails?
I'm gonna do cheetah print.
Mm-hmm.
Cheetah print French tips.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You like the French tip?
Sí, me gusta. I'm tired of these now, and they're outgrown. These are my natural nails.
Oh, they are? Oh, wow.
She just puts acrylic on top.
Like,
of them.
oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm trying to grow them out.
I know. It's just like so hard because then they break so easy whenever they're long. So you're like, oh,
Yeah.
annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine are like starting to break. They're getting long because they're outgrown. You need to go get them done. Yeah.
Can you get your nails done here? Working here?
Yeah.
Long?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, they're not usually. I mean, I usually do like very neutral colors. But yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah, I try to keep it not super long because, like, computer and typing and stuff sometimes can be a little bit uncomfortable. So, yeah. I mean, for this side, for the nursing piece, I'm not sure about that. Yeah, but here, since, yeah.
That's cute.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Have a great weekend, okay?
Thank you.
And please grab any snacks or anything on the way out. Let me go ahead. I'm just going to stop the recording. If you want to just stay here briefly, I'm going to go check in with the advocate and see if I can take you to the other room, okay? All right. I'll be right back. No problem. Remember any of
So the question is, using this protocol, of course, is it better, right? Does it have impact, and how does it impact the criminal justice system? In what ways? So what we're finding in Houston is that it's impacting prosecution in multiple ways, in both investigations and charging decisions, in grand jury presentations, plea negotiations, trauma-informed communications with the victim, in testimony, and in trial preparation. So we'll break that down just a little bit for you. When we look at investigative and charging decisions, prosecutors feel like they're getting a really complete and thorough account of the participant or the victim's experience, including sensory details. That's a big part of our asking questions, asking about the senses, what they were feeling, tasting, smelling during these assaults. Victims, in a way, have, by doing this AFI process, are working through the trauma. Because law enforcement is on site or, you know, a phone call away watching the interview, it allows them to think about what the victim's saying more and sort of develop questions or follow-up that they have from that interview, and therefore create really a stronger investigation, helping the charging decisions. And it's really, you know, kind of this non-judgmental evaluation. Our investigators are not, our interviewers are not investigators. They're not paid by law enforcement. They're not paid by the prosecutor's office. And we work really hard to train our interviewers on the elements of every offense, the checklist from the statute, so that as they're conducting the interview, they know that they're covering everything that we need to make that charge. With regard to grand jury presentations, it's helping in a lot of ways. And I think first and foremost, because the testimony from the survivor is not necessary, they can use that interview for the purpose of bringing charges before the grand jury. It avoids putting the survivor under oath and creating a second sworn statement that then would be used, you know, to cross-examine them at another time. It really prompts that kind of trauma-informed conversation with jury members. And juries who have seen these videos report appreciating the unbiased interview, that there's no skin in the game for these interviewers. When it comes to plea negotiations, it's helpful because prosecution can turn the interview, has to turn the interview over for disclosure to the defense attorney. And so the defense attorney being able to review that in advance gives them insight into what the survivor's testimony is going to be. And they have some perspective on how they might appear as far as their credibility and how they're going to answer questions. And so it really has increased, you know, willingness to come to the table and negotiate a plea on a case, because they have confidence that the victim is going to be articulate and be able to relay their experience in front of a jury. And they're able to see that for themselves and even show it to their client. With trial preparation, the prior interview really helps guide the direct testimony. As we said, one of my biggest pet peeves in training prosecutors is that question, and then what happened? And what happened next? And then what happened? And many of us were trained that way, in a way to try and not lead the witness. But by asking the question, and then what happened, we're implying a chronology of things that may not exist very well in the mind of the victim survivor. And so we set them up for failure when they start to be cross-examined and they say, well, the prosecutor just asked you if that happened before or after, and you said it happened after, right? So by using the video, we can guide our direct testimony to ask questions in the way that the victim is able to remember. It gives the survivor a lot of confidence, because they too can review that, right? They've given this statement prior, they know they can do it. So it gives them confidence to go into court and testify again. But also it's helpful to review if it's been a really long time since the assault to the interview. And maybe we all know that the court backlogs mean that cases don't get to trial when they should. It helps prosecutors understand and know what kind of demeanor to expect out of the victim. You all know that victims are as varied as people, right? So we have some victims who are very emotional and crying throughout the interview. We have others who are yelling and screaming. And so that's very helpful for prosecutors to know. Additionally, if it's a domestic violence case, if we have some kind of witness tampering going on, we might be able to bring that statement in under forfeiture by wrongdoing if the victim doesn't come to trial and the defendant had something to do with their absence. So this nice recorded statement exists for the purpose of bringing that in at trial. Also, when the victim is testifying, right, it can be helpful in refreshing their recollection or impeaching. We also find that prosecutors really enjoy calling our forensic interviewers to the witness stand, both to kind of educate the jury a little bit on trauma and responses and why we do forensic interviews. And, you know, while they can't testify that abuse occurred or assault occurred, they can say that the victim's behavior is consistent with someone who's been traumatized. And so there are lots of ways in which that forensic interview is really helping out in the courtroom. So when we talk about trauma-informed communication and we're trying to do, you know, even if we're not doing a full forensic interview, if we're trying to do better with our victim survivors, we really want to make sure that it's an open dialogue, that we emotionally validate our victims. I think for so long, law enforcement was under the impression that if they in any way validated what the victim was saying, that then they appeared like they weren't impartial. But just to say, I'm so sorry this happened to you, I'm sorry that you're hurting, creates a connection and makes someone comfortable and willing to talk to us. And using really non-judgmental, neutral language. Our interviewers are just amazing at not reacting, no matter what they hear in that room, and not being judgmental about anything that they hear from our survivors. So when we started with this program, there were not a lot of forensic interviewing programs in the country. And even the forensic interviewing training that existed was largely for law enforcement. We weren't finding a lot of programs where forensic interviewing was being done by neutral third parties. And so as we've started to create our program, we want to help create the research out there that's going to back it up and encourage the use of it in the future. So to date, we've had one small study done on our program, and we will continue to engage researchers and try to have additional studies done to see if we can show that it's having an improved outcome in criminal justice proceedings. So the study that we had done to date was done by UTMB, the University of Texas medical branch, and this study is available. I put it on a slide. I'm sure that's a little bit hard to read. You can get a copy of it if you want. But basically what we did was the researchers looked at the protocol that we developed in the process. They did some evidence gathering by conducting interviews with stakeholders who were utilizing our forensic interviewing, including law enforcement and prosecutors. And then in the second phase, they went through and reviewed some AFI transcripts. And in the third phase, they actually talked to or had a survey of AFI participants who'd completed a forensic interview in the preceding 12 months. So collecting all of that information, we were trying to see if it was having improved outcome with stakeholders and how participants who'd been through an interview felt about it. And so the findings that we have from our very first inaugural study was that law enforcement and prosecutors both felt that the program improved evidence collection and created stronger cases and therefore increased victim engagement in the system. And they felt that it provided more complete and accurate information than they were getting from interviews prior to the implementation of AFI. When we look at the findings from participants who had an AFI in the preceding 12 months, they felt that the interviewers were warm and responsive and really put them at ease. They often reported feeling more comfortable talking with the interviewer than they had been talking to law enforcement. And nearly half of them met with an advocate after their interview to receive additional resources. The other finding that we didn't put up here that I would note was almost universally, our participants said that they would recommend to someone else who said, hey, I've been asked by the police to go do this AFI thing. Should I do it? That they would recommend to someone to follow through and do the interview. And I think when we look at the statistics and how low reporting is on interpersonal violence, we know that only about 20% of all sexual assaults that are committed are ever reported to law enforcement. I think we could start to see a turn in that statistic when what people are saying is, yeah, go get the interview. It really helped. It was good. It's not scary. The interviewers are nice. And so I was most excited about that finding, that people are out there saying, yeah, you should do this. So trauma-informed interviewing techniques, we have a few kind of misconceptions that exist about victims and what they're going to remember. So historically, there's the old adage, and I know this is probably not true anymore, but there's that kind of old adage, just the facts, ma'am, right? That we don't want to take time for all this other information. And generally, victims have been asked to provide their information chronologically. And now what we understand about trauma and the brain function is that that's very difficult. Historically, interviewers have been focused on the who, what, when, where, and why questions. Again, when we understand trauma and the brain, what we know is that in that traumatic moment, based on how the brain functions naturally and the hormonal response that's going on, is that the brain is going to focus on what it perceives will keep that person alive. And those details, what will keep them alive, what will help them cope. And those details are what becomes central to that event. Everything else becomes peripheral. So when we think that victims will remember very specific details, like why wouldn't you remember what color his shirt was? Why wouldn't you remember where his pants went during the assault? It's because our brains don't remember those assaults like a movie, right? It actually is like one of the old film strips from when you were a kid, or at least when I was a kid. And the film strip would break in places and they'd tape it back together. And so you'd have little chunks of the movie missing, or the audio would get out of sync with the movie. That's more what a trauma memory is like. It isn't like remembering the happiest day of your life where you can tell that story with a nice beginning, middle, and end. It's chunky and it's not in order. And so historically, when we did these investigative interviews, we made victims doubt themselves and feel bad because we asked the questions in a way that set them up to fail. And so when we understand how the brain encodes and captures those memories, then that tells us that when we ask sensory questions instead of who, what, when, where, why, we know that emotional and sensory memories are what are being encoded in the brain. And so that may get us to those other details that we need eventually, but they were encoded and stored differently. So the questions need to be asked differently.
So like we mentioned earlier, we do offer a more extensive training. It's like a 40-hour training that we do offer where we go more in depth on these protocol. But some of the takeaways from today for you guys to use if you're talking to a victim is maybe if you have I know every circumstances is maybe different, but if you can interview in a space that feels safe for the victim, they may be talking about sensitive topics, so that's not something that maybe they want to do out in the open. So maybe just finding a private space for you guys to talk with victims. Also manage all of their needs, like if it's cold outside, maybe getting a blanket, or making sure that they, maybe if they have not eaten anything, making sure that all of that's addressed before talking to them. And also familiarize the victim with the environment. Again, it can be a little scary to go somewhere where you've never been. So just making sure that they know where they're at and showing them what that space is. And I think it's also very important to utilize our tools that we have within our community, like our victim advocates. They're a great tool whenever we talk with our victims. So if there is an interview and maybe you can contact your community and have an advocate present during that time when you talk with the victim, just to make sure that if they need any community resources, or if they feel maybe more comfortable with somebody else present there as well, it's important. And if possible, I know, again, every circumstance can be a little bit different, but if you are able to do that interview in that person's language, that's something that it's, for us, I think it shows that it's very helpful. They maybe feel more comfortable. They may be sharing more details just because they are able to express in their own language. So if that's a possibility, that's something to keep in mind. This picture right here, it's a picture of the soft interview room at our North Texas location. And this was implemented by Project Beloved. So they went into our facility and they created this space for us.
Yes, and if you're not aware of what Project Beloved is, I would look it up. It's called the Molly Jane Mission. Molly Jane is a young woman who was raped and murdered. And her mother, Tracy Matheson, started this project in her honor. And so they do lots of great things. One of them is they help build soft interview rooms in communities that don't have any. Another is called their Beloved Bundles, which is a backpack with everything that someone would need after a sexual assault examination. It has a change of clothes, it has a toothbrush, a hairbrush, all the things that you would need to feel good leaving the hospital with some dignity when you might have to leave your clothes behind. So go ahead and look up Project Beloved. We're a big supporter. We think they do amazing work, and obviously they built us a beautiful soft interview room there. And
Yes.
I do think we have time for a couple of questions. I see that there are 2 questions in the question and answer, so we'll go ahead and address those. So how do you register for adult forensic training with your program? I'm extremely interested in this approach with our victims. So I would encourage you to either reach out to Danny or I at our email. We only do a course when we have enough interest. So we need, probably a minimum of 5 or 6 participants. 10 would be ideal. We're willing to do the training usually like twice a year. So if you reach out, and we've had a few other people interested, we can try and set up a training, and we'd be happy to talk with you about that.
Yes. You can also check our website sometime whenever, if we do have the training, that's where we would post it, and that's where you could register as well, if we do have that training.
So the next one is, what is the cost associated with an AFI? How does TXF&E fund the program and these interviews? So currently this program is being funded by the Harris County DA's office. They were so interested in having these interviews that they are currently funding it. And if you have further interest in that, again, reach out. I know Kara, the CEO, would be happy to talk with you about that. I think long term, we're hopeful that law enforcement may also be willing to kick in and fund these interviews. But right now, we're not charging anyone involved for the cost of the interview. The next question is, I examine human trafficking and torture victims who are often located in other countries, Afghanistan. Can you speak to special challenges and offer any tips relative to the virtual interviews examinations? Do you have any tips or tricks, Danny, that you want to share?
anything.
One thing I will tell you is that, we are always very concerned about undue influence. So one of the things that we do is when they are being examined long distance is we have our interviewer show the room, move the camera really slowly so people don't get car sick, but show the room to show that they're alone and this is being done confidentially. And we ask that the participants do the same thing. We have actually found in some respects that I think AFI participants find it easier to share, that maybe it's a little less emotional over the screen than it would be face to face. That has been our experience sometimes.
Yeah, and that is something like I think talking to them prior, just letting them know that we will need them to be in a private space. Again, talking the things that we may talk may be sensitive. So just for them to feel comfortable already going into the interview, knowing that they are gonna be by themselves. What else? I think I know, and we always try to do it like the same. We have the same protocol for whenever we do our virtual interviews. We try to make them as comfortable as possible. I know it's over the computer, but I always let them know, like, is there anything that you need before going in there? Like, have you eaten anything? Do you want to bring any snacks? Do you have all of your basic needs addressed? And like still building that rapport, even if it's over a computer. But like I think Julie said, some people sometimes may feel more comfortable talking over a computer than in person. Yeah.
I think someone did ask for email addresses. They're on the screen right now. And then I see also in the chat, the website to TXF&E was up. And we do have a QR code. I hope that will work over the screen. If you want to follow TXF&E on social media, you can do that from there.
One more question in the chat that asks, do the forensic interviewers introduce evidence during the interview?
They can. There are times when they have done that. So maybe we have a photograph or something that needs to be identified by the victim, that law enforcement needs the victim to say, yep, that's the person, or that's the house or the car or whatever. So generally the procedure that we follow for that is it would come after their narrative during the fact-finding portion of the interview. Typically what we ask the interviewers to do is to kind of hold that image first up to the camera so that it can be seen from the camera's perspective, and then they would present it to the participant for identification. And if they do identify it or tell us anything about it, right, we would probably have them sign and date it so that for the purposes of a good chain of evidence, they would know that that was the photo that was shown to them in the interview room.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And if it's any photos that law enforcement gives to us, we just also make sure that there is like no writing, no names or anything, and they're just like a clean picture of what they want us to show. And we don't do photo lineups.
So there's another question. If a victim advocate or a victim liaison would get certified as an AFI interviewer, can they interview a victim in a soft room located in a police department? I think the answer to that is yes. We definitely prefer that this be done by a non-police officer. But in a soft interview room with a camera in a law enforcement office, I think would be fine. I don't know, sometimes victims have a hesitation or they're maybe not super comfortable with police. So I don't know if that would cause some hesitation, but I think it would be appropriate.
All right. Thank y'all so much. So much great information shared today. And please don't hesitate to reach out to Danni or Julie via their email. I know they would be happy to share any information and help that they can. One thing that we're excited about is our conference on crimes against women. We are celebrating 20 years next May. And so we would love for you to come and join in the celebration with us in Dallas. Registration is now open. Feel free to use the QR code there or check out our website, conferencecaw.org. It's a big party, and we just have I know that sounds like, conference not a happy topic, but we all get together and take care of ourselves in this hard work that we do together. And then here's my contact information. Would love if you have any questions. Please reach out if you have topics that you would like to see ICCR highlight in a future webinar. Please reach out and let us know. Our next webinar, which will be up on our website within the next week, is going to be on December the 5th, same time, 1:30 to 3. And we're going to be talking about a recent NIJ study on strangulation policies and protocols with law enforcement. So would love to see you there. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you everyone for joining.